Hi guys, welcome back to the Improvement Season podcast. It is me, Steve Hall, with Pascal Floor, as always, with the watermelon monster, which I'm very jealous of because I have pineapple, which is a regret of mine. But the more important news, we have Jeffrey here. I'm going to say it right, aren't I, Jeffrey? It's Jeffrey, not Joffrey. I don't know where I picked that up from.
It's probably from me, because I was always saying that. Do you have a monster with you as well, Geoff?
I don't. I should have got one, but it's later here. It's like 5 p.m. So if I had a monster right now, it would definitely keep me up for sure.
No, absolutely. First things first, Geoff, right? Because probably a couple of people will tune in who already follow you over on YouTube and know everything about you. Some people will know nothing about you. Or very little, at least. I just know a lot about you from following you over on Instagram. I know that you are in China, I think it is, right? But why China? What's the reason behind it? You don't look Chinese to me, but correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe there's something about it. I don't know.
I think I have like a 16th of Mongolian in me somewhere.
There you go.
But yeah, no, not Chinese. I initially came here as an English teacher like 12 years ago. And I just figured, right out of college, I would just spend a year, just 1 year to see the world and to experience a different culture. And it kind of snowballed a little bit into the second year and third year, fourth, fifth, sixth year onwards. So I've been here for a long time, pretty much all my adult life. And, it was a bit of a culture shock at first. But I think now if I went back to the US, I would have more culture shock going back to the US because I haven't been there in a decade. And most of what I see is just through social media or talking to friends. And so it seems like things have changed quite a bit. And I think if I moved back, it would be a big adjustment process.
Probably, yeah. It's so funny because everyone who's going to Asia is doing it to become an English teacher, and then they stay there most of the time. Because Andy Morgan from ripbody.com, that was his journey as well. And when I visited Japan back in 2014, I met so many people whose path was the same as yours. Oh, we lost Geoff, right?
Yeah, unless he's just really good at holding a stern, fixed face.
That could very well be. So in the meanwhile, Steve, how are you doing, by the way? We can just continue,
Oh, but I don't want to miss. Hopefully he can kick. Oh, there we go. He's back.
There we go.
Back? Okay, cool.
You froze for a moment there.
But we just wanted to continue because you had a very good facial expression as if you're listening to us at the moment.
Yeah. Are you married now, Geoff, or is it you've got a partner who's based out there too?
Yeah. I've been married for about 5 years, and that's certainly part of the decision to stay in China, because a lot of foreigners are moving out because things are getting a little bit tightly controlled. Let's put it that way.
You have to be careful what to say online, right?
Yeah. Well, certain areas are probably touchy topics. But for me, I've been married about 5 years, and so I would say if I wasn't married, I probably would have already either left or would have considered leaving. But we met here and we're comfortable here, and life is certainly not bad here on a day-to-day basis. And so it's one of those things where we're very happy and very comfortable here.
That sounds amazing. Sometimes I stroll through YouTube and I once had a video popping up that says typical white male speaking Cantonese fluently, right? And people are shocked locally. Is it kind of the same way with you when you are just you being jacked, being massive, walking around, and then all of a sudden speaking fluently the language there?
Well, actually, my Chinese has gotten worse. Because my work is all in English. And so, back when I worked in a Chinese company, we would use Chinese all the time. I never learned Cantonese. It's actually very different from Mandarin. I mean, they're really not very similar at all. I think French and English have more in common than Mandarin and Cantonese, just linguistically.
Yeah.
And so I can understand a little bit of Cantonese sometimes. And my wife speaks it. She speaks like 8 languages, which is very
Wow.
common here in China, because you might know your local dialect and then your province capital dialect and then Mandarin and then maybe also English and then, a few other languages like dialects sprinkled in. But each dialect is pretty much like a separate language. They use the same characters, but they're pronounced totally differently. So when I go back to my wife's hometown, I can't really understand what they're saying. A little bit. I've learned to understand a little bit. Like I understand my name, so if they start talking about me, I can understand it, kind of. But there are a few phrases that I've learned to understand.
Yeah.
But it's something that it's basically like learning a whole new language, because it's only maybe 10% or 15% the same.
No,
And
absolutely.
everything is pronounced pretty differently. So yeah, it's people who know Cantonese are pretty rare, just because Mandarin is a more popular language to learn overall, because it's a lot bigger, it's a lot more useful. And if you are a foreigner who speaks a local dialect, man, you are a rarity. Like local people will talk about you in front of your face, and then if you're like, if you know that you understand, they're like, oh my, whoa, what's going on? It's crazy. But it's just such a big time investment for such a small party trick to be able to understand. And you can always just use Google Translate, or you can. There isn't a whole lot of motivation to learn in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So for me, it's gotten worse because I spend all my time just, making videos or coaching or something, and so it's all in English. But it does come back as well if I use it.
And just for us and also the listeners, what it is that you're doing full time right now is solely coaching and also then YouTube content.
Yeah. So those are both full time, and they've been full time since like 2020-ish, like early 2020.
What does how do you set up your coaching? Like, how do you have weekly check-ins? How many clients do you tend to work with? How much of your time is spent coaching versus like YouTube content? I'd be really interested in that.
Yeah, so it's kind of like you have to strike a balance between content creation and the coaching, and they almost limit each other. So if you have a video that pops off, you get more inquiries, which prevents you from making more videos, which reduces the inquiries. And so they kind of like self-regulate to a certain extent. I keep it pretty low. I tend to keep it under 30 clients, ideally under 20. And then I don't do weekly check-ins as well. So I don't do video calls or phone calls. And I'm very upfront with that. If someone's like, I need a weekly check-in, I just say, hey, I'm not the coach for you. And then I'll, refer them out to someone or give suggestions. But yeah, I don't do the weekly call thing just from time differences. And I prefer to do it just through email or DM that way. And so I think that's just better. And I'm very upfront with that. And, I just say if I wanted to do calls, I would have to charge probably 2 or 3 times more, just because it is a bigger time investment. So, and then, yeah, I just try to balance them as best I can. And, it kind of works out for the most part.
No, absolutely. Also, then with the calls, I can so much relate to that. What I offer now is for all of my athletes, if they want, every 3 months, they can book in a call with me in exchange for 1 week's worth of check-in. And that call is also just like half an hour long though, but it's a little bit of a different style of a check-in then. But I totally relate to you and what it is that you said there, because it takes up so much time. People, due to time zone differences, can mess things up. Sometimes things get in the way and all that kind of stuff. It's such an inefficient way. And people aren't fully aware of that most of the time. They think they want a call, but actually they don't.
No. It's in terms of just conveying the information, it's quite inefficient. But it can be useful in some ways. For me, I always actually suggest an in-person personal trainer if possible. Like I did that for a little while, people would sneak me into their gym here in China, where I was just sort of getting into coaching. I was getting my toe in the water, just really trying it out. And so, they would sneak me into their gym, and I would pretend like I wasn't training them, even though I was training them. And I would tell the gym, "Oh yeah, I've moved into the area. I'm just looking for a gym." I'd be secretly training up this guy. And that was an interesting time in my life, because I was basically broken transitioning from teaching to coaching, which was it took a few years, because I really wanted to make sure that I not only could do it well, but I enjoyed it. Just because when you're starting a new career, you can like training but not like coaching, right? A lot of people like training and they would make terrible coaches. So I wanted to make sure that it was something that I actually enjoyed and was good at. And so I kind of dipped my toe in the water for a couple of years, even though I was broke and probably should have been charging more than I was. And then, I sort of gradually transitioned towards YouTube and then writing on Quora, and then just sort of gradually scale things up from there.
Do you prefer the in-person stuff or the online stuff? Do you have a preference? Which one?
I kind of miss the in-person stuff, because for me right now, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to do things in person, just because, being in China, there's not a lot of people who I would be working with here, I guess. Plus, logistically, once you get to a certain point, one-on-one stuff just doesn't scale, right? I remember seeing some big social media influencers, and they were doing hour-long calls for $1,000. $1,000. And that was on their website. And it just looks bad, because it's almost like exploiting your audience at that point, right? You've gotten to a point where your time is worth so much that you have to charge so much that it's not worth it to the person who's actually paying. They might think it's worth it, but it's not. And so when I get, people saying, "Oh, do you do consults?" I just say, no, it's not worth it for anyone involved at that point. I think once you get to a certain, I guess, critical mass, you're better off focusing on things that are not one-on-one. So I don't really do in-person stuff, although I do enjoy it, actually. Being able to be there in person with someone and watching them lift and being able to correct them in real time, I don't think anything replaces that, especially with the advent of AI. Hey, Pascal, I know you're
absolutely. No, that is also my sentiment, absolutely. And I've talked about it, and I know that you are listening to our Improvement Season podcast as well, that there probably will be a shift more so back towards offline personal training due to those innovations. And it's only accelerating, of course. And also due to the things that you brought up as well, that so many people who've competed or who like training in general think that they want to be coaches, then they dip their feet into it, and the commitment isn't the same. They don't have the same passion and fire for it as their own training and committing to that as well. And that's why they fail miserably most of the time, or they start to hate the entire fitness industry, the entire journey, because they think that they've deserved a certain audience or a certain amount of clients because they love training that much, right? And it's often just a little bit being delusional. And I also very much like to coach offline. There's just something, I wouldn't say special about it, but different about it, that interconnection with the people. But at the same time, it's also the same as you. You would need to charge an insane amount of money at some point just due to commuting, being there, spending that time. That time is often, after a certain level of experience, better spent elsewhere.
Yeah, it takes a whole day to travel there and meet with them and then work out with them. And it's probably, even if it's a 2-hour session or something, it's probably 4 or 5, 6 hours all told, and planning everything out and communicating, etc. And so, just in terms of making it worth it compared to something else you could be doing, it's just, you'd have to charge so much that I would feel bad, right?
Exactly.
The price that I would have to charge, I would literally feel bad.
Yeah.
I couldn't even justify morally charging that much.
Yeah. It is tough. It is tough, but go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say, I guess the people you're coaching Geoff, aren't like the people that necessarily need that one-on-one help anyway. They're like at that next level where they need the more educational side, the programming side, the kind of maybe even accountability and long-term planning sort of side.
Yeah, exactly. And I work with all kinds. I tend not to work with beginners just because I don't find it as interesting, I guess, because like everything works. And so I don't know. I just don't find it all that interesting just from an intellectual perspective, because it's like solving a kitty puzzle. Like all the pieces are right there. It's the easiest puzzle in the world. Oh, wow. Good job. There's no dopamine release from getting results per beginner.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, I'm almost more about like seeking out interesting challenges to work with. So some more advanced guys. If you could make visible progress with someone who's been lifting 5+ years, well, and they already have a lot of stuff in place, that's when you feel that real sense of accomplishment, because you've actually done something. You've actually, taken on a challenge, a puzzle that is worth taking on. And so for me, usually I don't even work with beginners, because they're better off with more just general resources in a lot of cases. And I might say, hey, like, maybe just contact me in a few years if you plateau, right? Because if you haven't plateaued, coaching can still be useful, but getting over those plateaus is where it really shines, and getting a second pair of eyes on a situation where you're not progressing, that's where I think coaching really does come in handy.
Yeah. And speaking about then the methodologies, because I know that you yourself, you train very, very hard, right? You can see it on your facial expressions, which is very nice to look at. And is that also kind of the way that you like to set up things around for your clients as well? And what does your typical philosophy and also methodology look like?
So actually, I'm a lot more reasonable with other people, just because, if I do something crazy and I mess myself up, I can justify that. Like, I'll just deal with the consequences. But with another person, you can't do that.
It's kind of as if you are investing money for someone else. They're giving you the money.
Exactly,
you have to have your risk management a little bit more in check when it is with your own finances.
For sure. Like, I'll invest in some crazy Ponzi scheme for gains, sure. But, when it's someone else's gains and, someone else's potential injury, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. So, I'm not going to be doing any drop sets on RDLs for another person or anything like that. It just doesn't, maybe it'll work, but maybe it really won't work. And when it really doesn't work, that's where, hamstrings start flying off and hitting other people in the face. So I tend to be more moderate with the volume. I am much more of a stickler for form. I really tell people, control the eccentric, spend 3, 4, maybe even 5 seconds on the way down. And, I tell people to take the same weight again and again and again, even a few weeks in a row, until I'm satisfied with how it looks, because people always want to go up in weight, but they haven't earned it most of the time. For me personally, I might go up like 10 or 15% in strength in a year, but it's actual real strength gain that corresponds to muscle growth. And so with a lot of people, they get a little bit greedy with the numbers, especially on social media. They're seeing other people who are way stronger. They want to get the physique. They want to get the strength. They want it now. They want it yesterday. And so I have to hold a lot of them back. On the other hand, some of them I have to push, because they finish a set and it kind of looks like a warm-up. If I'm not sure if you sent me a warm-up or not, it wasn't a working set, And so I would say probably a third of the people I have to hold back. A third of the people I have to push, either gently or perhaps even more than gently if needed. And then a third of the people are pretty much spot on, where I think that their technique is good, their proximity to failure is good, and then we just focus on small tweaks and changes. But for those thirds at the margin, depending on how far they are at the margin, where they're just not pushing at all, or they're pushing so hard that everything is breaking down and they're not getting a lot out of the set because they're pushing so hard that they're losing focus, or I used to train this way, where it was just raw aggression, just deadlifting until, it's hitching the bar up and then going for more reps and then failing at the knees and then failing at the shins, and then failing just off the ground, just pulling until the bar didn't even move. That's not particularly productive. It's high effort, it's failure, but in terms of the actual set doing something, as well as risk to reward or stimulus to fatigue ratio, it's just hard to justify that. It might feel stimulatory mentally in the moment. You get that satisfaction of the aggression, but it's not actually doing something to get you to your goal. Whereas now I'm a lot more controlled and a lot more precise. And that's where I see a lot of advanced lifters, how they lift. Like you look at Alberto Nunez, it's very, very, very hard training, but man, it's precise. You can tell exactly, he knows exactly what his body is doing, exactly where he is during the set, the joint angles, how he's pulling, how he's pushing, what muscles he's activating. From the first rep to the last rep, they slow down. He might reduce the range of motion at the end of a row, but you can tell that his focus is there during the entire set. So when you see someone do a set and they're very, very advanced like that, man, it's a beautiful thing. It really is. So following along on his journey and watching you guys train as well, you can tell, and this is a skill, and it takes a long time to learn. We talk about how powerlifting is a skill, trying to get technical with the movement in terms of your setup. Well, hypertrophy training is absolutely a skill as well, and I don't think it's really talked about enough. And so I've certainly become a lot more precise with my movements, where my failure is actually the muscle that I want to target failing, rather than technical failure or just going until beyond failure, but not actually stimulating the area that I want to grow. And so that has been a big change for me over the past few years.
I myself loved the entire section. I was just nodding the entire time because this very much also aligns with what I went through and what I've experienced with athletes as well. And my methodologies and also perception on things has significantly changed over the years. Swinging basically also from one side to the other. And what it is that you also described is what you can sometimes see on some certain IFBB pros, where it was more so swinging the weight. However, you can still see that they are targeting the back musculature, for example, when they are rowing. Each and every single rep, each and every single second still hits the back. Where it's a connection that is just either there, you have it automatically from the get-go, or it has been developed over years of training. Even though that it's kind of swinging for other people, you can feel it while watching the video. That's how good they are targeting their back musculatures on then certain rows or so.
I think a quote that I've heard you say a few times, Geoff, is like putting the muscle to the flame, like holding it there. Letting it be hard is something that I have to say to some clients who need to be pushed harder, where they're like, as soon as it gets hard, that's when form starts breaking down and everything. That's no, this is like you said, you have to really focus hard to take the target muscle to fail. It's easy to fail if you just go through the motions, my technique was slightly off and fail. But if you keep everything tight, focused throughout the entire set, you have to, even getting to a proximity to failure, that's probably where people then fail if they're not focused. If they get to 3-4 RL, they think, oh, that's failure because it got hard. It's no, now you have 4 more reps to go. Now this is the sweet spot for you.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So I actually hurt my QL about a year ago, actually February last year, so a little over a year ago. And so I couldn't squat, I couldn't deadlift, I could barely walk basically. And that year was the best year of quad gains that I ever had, because I couldn't squat, because I couldn't deadlift, because I couldn't do any of these movements that I had been doing. And, looking back, for me, the back squat done in most styles, maybe if I'm very upright with the knees forward, flat style, it'll be okay for quads. But for me, something like a leg press, performed very, very deep with the knees going way up, even taking my heels off the pad just to make it extremely quad dominant. A Smith machine hack squat, amazing. And so looking back, I never actually trained my quads. I trained my lower back, I trained my hips. I was always hitting technical failure. they were hard sets, but they weren't really hard sets for my quads. And so my quad training wasn't really quad training. It was doing the movements that some people said I should do because it worked for them because their femurs were half the length of mine. And so, you really do have to individualize things. And I think a lot of people are messing up their training on a grand scale where they've never trained their rear delts. They've never trained their lats. They've never trained their hamstring. Like most of the musculature, they've never actually trained. They've gotten maybe some newbie gains, but that's not that hard to get. You can get that just from sort of a very generalized training plan. But I think to get to the next level, yeah, you do have to really focus on the right exercise selection with the right technique in order to fully maximize growth.
That's why I'm also a big proponent of, especially in the first initial years, of trying to learn about the mind-muscle connection and also listening to something like the pump, because it is then a good indicator to for you to build that connection, that neurological connection. If you don't have that, how should you know whether you're really hitting that muscle group or not? It's kind of, then you leave it up to chance of either you hit it or not, right? And that's why I find it very, very good to at least develop that skill of the mind-muscle connection. Is it super important? No, right? Especially when you're doing something like a full-on proper back squat or so, right? Fully way down. If you go there, you will probably still get some stimulus into the quads. Is it to the highest extent? Not so much. Will it then carry over into then being useful for other exercises? Not so much, because you haven't really then developed the mind-muscle connection. But if you then put in the work and effort, have some certain accessory movements or whatever you want to call it to really build that proper mind-muscle connection, know what a pump feels like and not just like rely on what Arnold is quoting, but really know what it feels like, experiencing it for yourself, I think then you will benefit from it in the long term, because then you can start doing whatever exercise you want and really feel it then in the body part that you're targeting. Such as, I don't know how it was with you, Geoff, but for me personally, no matter what I'm doing now with a back movement, I can make each and every single back movement hit each and every single part of my back if I want to.
Yeah, oh yeah. I think it's, Mike Israel's sort of stimulus assessment, so the pump, the disruption, etc., perturbation. I guess I've been dismissive of that kind of stuff in the past, but I guess if you don't use those, what else are you going to use? Right, like a study, EMG? I mean, if it's not that, what else do you go for? So I think those are a pretty good general way of assessing how your training is going in the moment, because long-term muscle growth is so hard to assess once you're more advanced anyway. So what do you commit to a training plan for 6 months and you gain 1/4 of an inch on your arms? That's sort of within the error of measurement anyway. So assessing your training and if it's working, yeah, you have to learn how to go by feel, and the pump is something that at the very least it tells you where is being activated. Especially if you're lean, you can tell exactly where the blood is going. You can see it just from the beginning of the set to the end of the set. Like your face fills with blood, but also the area the area that you're presumably targeting will also pump up. And in terms of soreness, I think overusing these proxies is where people might get in trouble. So they don't get sore and they're like, oh no, I'm not sore. Well, you're probably okay. But I do think that if someone is never sore, they're trying to grow their chesticles and they've never had a sore chest. It's just never been sore. And their front delts are getting really sore or something, or their triceps, but they've never had a sore chest. Yeah, I think in the extreme, it's actually useful, right? It's you want to maybe be a little bit sore, but not too sore, in that Goldilocks zone of moderation. And then using the pump and then the disruption and the mind-muscle connection, you can feel what is actually working, when you're doing a movement. And I actually found that biomechanics has been useful overall. Just learning what a particular muscle or particular chunk of a muscle does, and then you can modify any movement to get what you want out of it, right? Just maybe something really subtle like using squat shoes or putting plates under your heels when squatting, or plates under your toes when you're doing an RDL, or just changing the joint angles when you're bench pressing a little bit. I think those can go a long way. And just the knowledge of what a muscle does, I think is very useful. And a lot of people train and they don't even think about what the function of what the muscle actually does.
Yeah.
And, they want to get big, but they haven't actually learned what the muscles they're trying to get big actually do. Which is crazy.
That's a good point, I think.
I was just going to say, on the squat experience, I had the exact same thing. My adductors just grew, my glutes just grew. I never had like a solid quad pump from that movement. And then I switched to something like a hack squat, leg press, leg extensions, like biasing lunges towards like the quads. Then I get this gnarly pump disruption, these short-term proxies that are correlated with lots of things that cause hypertrophy. So there's something there. And it's like you said, what else do we have to rely on in the short term? I think training as like an advanced natural bodybuilder is like such a slow process in any way. So if you've got nothing to gauge how your training is going, apart from my performance is like, I don't know, it's so slow for it to gain an extra rep. Like you said, 10 to 15% strength increases year on year is good going. So it's such a slow process. Measurement errors, again, like you can't trust those photos. Like you can convince yourself of gains, but you're gaining more fat than muscle when you're in your surplus. So I think it's something to have. And I don't know if actually it hasn't come out yet, but our buddy Jake Remmett from Data Driven Strength, he's got a paper that he's working on. I think it's his PhD actually, which is looking at using these short-term proxies to auto-regulate training. And if someone gets better results and it's like a within subject design, like bicep curls, one arm does just like straight sets, the other one auto-regulates based off the proxies, which is super cool. So I'm interested to see how that goes. I have a feeling there's not going to be much difference between the two. And then Pascal, you made this point and I just had to hold on to it. Was it so funny actually, if a newbie hears about the pump, they probably Google it, they find Arnie, and then he talks about it being like coming. And it's like, no wonder no one knows what the fucking pump is. Yeah. They're expecting it to feel like they're coming in the gym. So I didn't have any other points of that.
But I always say to my athletes as well, when they are then getting to the sweet spot of finally achieving a great pump or having a good mind-muscle connection, once you have it, it's kind of like opening up Pandora's box. Once you see it, you can't ever unsee what's inside there. And from there, I always have the feeling that the training is then being taken to the next level. I don't know how you guys feel about this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no. I mean, you look at I've become more and more enamored with bro training.
Yeah.
You see these guys and it looks like, as you mentioned, Pascal, like they're just chucking around weights. But then you really look and they're actually just smoothing out the resistance curve. They're doing this instinctively. They can't actually conceptualize it. They can't actually explain what they're doing. But we can for them, I guess, because the eccentric, they're overloading the eccentric essentially, right? So if you're doing a row, it's most challenging in the contracted position. So they're using momentum to get it there. And then you're also overloading the eccentric because you use that momentum. And so you might hear someone say something like, oh, a lateral raise is most difficult at the top position. And that's kind of true if you do it very strictly, right? If you take 4 seconds on the way up, yes, it is by far the most challenging out here at the top. But if you're using a little bit of momentum, you're actually smoothing that out. And if you look at someone's face when they're doing slightly cheated lateral raises, they might actually get the most grimace, which is where the most effort is, at the bottom. Because that's where you're really trying to accelerate the weights to make sure that they get to the top. And then you're trying to control them on the way down. And usually you're failing if the weights are fairly heavy. And then you actually, because the weights have momentum on the way down, you're getting a stretch at the bottom. So there's actually quite a lot of tension at the bottom, where on paper, if you just look at the screenshots of the set, you would say, oh, there's no tension at the bottom. Look at gravity. Well, they're not taking into account the fact that the weights are traveling downward, and then you have to reverse them using the delt. So I think when people are doing cheated lateral raises or rows, they're really just trying to smooth things out so that it's most challenging. There's no most challenging part, so it's just more even. And it's challenging at every part of the range of motion. And, you look at Ronnie train, you look at a lot of these IFBB pros train, and it's clearly effective for them. And I think a lot of them aren't actually thinking about what they're doing. They just felt the muscle working best using that sort of. I mean, if you look at Ronnie Coleman do dumbbell presses, he's kind of like bouncing out of the bottom, and it's not locked out because that's probably going to be more triceps or more traps, and he's really just sort of keeping it on the front delt. I mean, you look at Branch Warren train, and maybe that's a little bit extreme where he's sort of. It looks like he's just flailing around. Some of these videos, and his coach was like, man, Branch has had so many injuries and he's overcome them through the years. And he's just, the background footage is him just sort of push pressing this bar, seated, just flailing and hurling it around. But the thing is, he got big. He got big from it. And sure, steroids, I guess. But the training is still certainly relevant. And, sloppy training, even though it certainly has downsides, it can be effective. I think it's just more about managing how much do you cheat, how much momentum do you use, because it can certainly get excessive. On the other hand, if you're just super strict, you're moving very robotically, you're overthinking things, you're getting out your protractor during the set and you're trying to measure the angle of your arm during your rows, that kind of stuff. Some people I just have to tell, you need to move more aggressively.
Yeah.
Because I can tell they're in their own head. I don't know what they're thinking, but they're clearly just focusing so much that they're really not getting very much out of the set. So I think it's about finding a moderation between just being the exercise nerd, the guy who's just like, my joint angles have gone too far and I need to, I need to move it back. Or the guy who is not thinking at all and just, trying to move the most weight possible. I think there's somewhere in the middle there where you're going to get the best results.
100%. Also there, I fully agree with you, and I can very much resonate with everything that you've said there. And the way that I see it is, at first, you want to, of course, learn the instruments. And the instruments are, of course, the gym equipment and so. And once you understand how to make use of those, and to really, it's kind of ingrained, the movement patterns already and the neurological connections, then you can start improvising. You're kind of a jazz musician now. At first, you have to become a musician in order to play the instrument. And then, once you understand the theory behind it, then you can start just playing and playing with others, playing with each and every kind of instrument, right? And be flexible about it. And this is the way that I see it. And some people have it intuitively, where they can go in and they are advancing very quickly. And some need to build that. And I think that it's especially important then for the listeners. I think it's still important to learn at first, moving intentionally and all that kind of stuff. And then later on, you don't have to think about it that much anymore. You can just then go in there and freaking train hard, right? Instead of overthinking things. Just bring the fire then to the training instead of then overthinking of like, oh, is that the right angle? Man, start listening then to your own body. And this is something, and I very much like that, Geoff, that you brought it up, because I said it in the past already a couple of times when it comes to nutrition, but also here recently more and more when it comes to training. Be more like a bro at times. That doesn't have to be like that you are that typical gym bro that many people have in their head or mind, but it's more like go in there because they are doing a lot of things right, and they at least bring the fire, and that creates results. And often overthinking doesn't.
100%. And it's that 4-sector model from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to conscious competence to unconscious competence. So basically, when you start out, you don't know what you're doing, but you don't know that you don't know what you're doing. And then you realize, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. And then you realize, kind of figure things out, but you have to focus on it. And then eventually you figure things out so much that you don't have to focus on it. It just happens. And yeah, you're right. I think some people, for whatever reason, maybe they have an athletic background. There's probably a genetic component to this, realistically speaking. I know some people don't like to hear that, but realistically, some people just learn things faster, right? And not just training with everything. Genetics, they do impact everything. And so some people, yeah, they do I mean, they get incredible results their first year or two, and they take to it like a fish to water. They just, for whatever reason, they touch a barbell, they touch a weight, and they know what to do. They know that this does this, and then when they do that, it works. And you might say, oh, the genetics are just how they respond to the training, but it might be how they do the training as well. I don't think that's really talked about enough. And then other people, yeah, they're going to take a while to really forge those neural pathways, to really experiment. And I think anyone can accomplish a lot, probably more than they think, but for some people it does take more time than others. And for me, yeah, it has taken time. I mean, 8 years is a lot of time to some people, but also, talking to people who have trained a lot longer than I have, 8 years is pretty early to get the physique that I have. But I also don't think that I've been the type who grows very, very quickly. Like, I've seen some people where a few years in, they're just like bigger than me. And, sometimes they don't even know what they're doing. Like, you talk to them, and after a few minutes, you're like, wow, you actually don't know anything about training, and you look like that, and you're natural. Wow. Like, that is, I mean, I see some people who are ridiculously gifted. And so when people are like, you have amazing genetics, I have above average genetics for sure, but I'm not a freak. I'm not one of those people who just touches the weight and anything happens. No matter your technique or anything, no matter your diet, you go out drinking and stuff, like, and you make amazing results. No, like, I have to have everything be pretty much on point. Otherwise, I don't see any kind of results.
What I found to be the case, at least for naturals, is if you are below the 10-year mark, you are more so in the camp of being closer to genetically blessed. And so if you already have below 10 years of training experience, great results and stuff like this, but more so 10 years of proper lifting is the sweet spot where things really start to pop out and where you really stand above the average crowd.
Yeah. And people don't want to, I mean, if I tell someone who's a beginner that I've been lifting 8 years, the reaction is like, 8 years? That's such a long time. But then when I talk to people who have been lifting like 20 or 30 years, it's like I'm a beginner. They're like, you're still making visible progress. You're basically a beginner compared to some of these guys. And so, depending on who I'm talking to, I either feel like really advanced or like a noob. As you said, if it's before a decade, you're basically just getting started. And I think it's also worth noting that the amount of time that you've been lifting, you also have to keep in mind how many of those years were quality, right? Because I probably have 2 quality years, maybe 3, where everything was dialed in, on point, stress lower, schedule, allowed me time to train, etc. There were a few years where I, in hindsight, I was trying to power build, or I was just avoiding all isolations, or I was doing ridiculous volume because I read a study that said that would be the thing. 45 sets a week for quads. I tried it. It didn't end very well. And the sets didn't end up being productive, and it was a lot of time wasted. But, so there were a lot of years that you have to spend the time experimenting. So you might make some gains while you're experimenting, but those years are kind of to set you up to grow later when you figure your shit out.
Yeah.
And so, on paper, you might say, okay, well, here's this curve of how much you'll grow per year. We've all seen the sort of like, 15 pounds your first year, then the next year, this is how much you gain, and diminishes. Well, there's going to be some years where you don't gain anything. In 2020, I didn't gain. I mean, the first part of the year was lost for, and then
reasons.
Yeah, for pandemic reasons. Anyway, and then the second part of the year, I was like really focusing on the YouTube side of things, like uploading every day. And then I was doing power building in December of that year. And so like looking back, I didn't grow at all that year compared to 2019. And I think if you've been lifting 10 years, it's likely you're going to have years where you look back and you just didn't grow at all. Like you kind of just look exactly the same. Like if you have a newborn child or something, I would just write that year up as kind of a loss. Like you just you maintain and you're happy to do that, you know. I have some friends who they have a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, and I think like managing expectations in those situations is very important. You know, because I probably gained about 5 pounds a year the past couple years, and I've actually gotten messages from people who are like, only 5 pounds. And I'm like, all right, well, message back in a few years, buddy.
Yeah.
But realistically, I don't know if I would say there's a limit, but there are going to be diminishing returns just from looking at literally every other lifter in history. And so you kind of have to manage expectations and, okay, maybe this year it'll be 3 or 4. Maybe it'll be 5. Like there's an outside chance that I figure some more stuff out. But then it'll be 2 and then 1. And then, you know, you're fighting for scraps. And then you're the natural bodybuilder who posts his results online. And you're like, I gained 2 pounds of muscle the past 3 years. Amazing results. And everyone is like, I can't see the difference.
Yeah, I think.
Why did you put so much time into this?
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
I think that also speaks to some of the things we've already been talking about, where with your training, it's different to some of your clients because you're more advanced than probably a lot of the people you coach. So like the risk of you fucking up, I mean, and losing anything is much smaller because you're not going to lose muscle you've gained if you're training hard. But then you probably need to risk experimenting with things more because the research is great, but it's not done on people like us. It's simply not. And so it's not going to pass out exactly what we should be doing. And we can only infer from it and get some kind of way of advice from it. And that journey you spoke about in terms of like, I don't know what the quote is. It's something like after 5 years, you've gained like 90% of the natural muscle you're ever going to gain. It's like in practice, that just never works out for people because we fuck up somewhere. Like I span my wheels for a good 3 years just because I wasn't like letting my body weight go up very much and like staying too lean because partitioning ratios, and you learn and you develop. And I think this is why I also bring it back to like coaching. This is why if you are in that intermediate area and you're lost, confused why you're not seeing progress, for someone like who was just looking in at what I was doing, probably really clear, just like there's probably people shouting at me online being like, Steve, why don't you just eat more and let your body fat go up a bit higher? You'll probably gain some good muscle there. But I don't want to hear it because again, we come to that point of which we've made is like, if you get too stuck on one camp, like PubMed warrior, I'm following evidence-based recommendations to the book. It's like that can hold you back if you don't look at what's happening in real time. And therefore you have to take some of your own intuition into these things, and that can help you kind of develop the next stage in your career. So yeah, I thought that was a really cool discussion.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's so important to realize that there are all these variables floating around and all interacting with each other. Whereas with exercise science, that's not what they're doing. They're trying to isolate one variable, and as they should, right? That's the point of a study. That's the point of science in general, just to find out how things work. And so they're trying to keep everything the same and isolate this one variable. Whereas with training, that's not what you should be doing at all, right? Like there's no point in trying to maximize your volume and ignoring everything else, or have that to be at the detriment of everything else. So, whether it's your volume or your intensity or your frequency or your technique or how much you're eating or how much you're sleeping, yeah, there's a lot of stuff floating around and they're all bumping into each other and it's a lot to manage. And sometimes you don't actually know what caused the progress. Usually I can figure it out eventually if it happens enough times. Oh, when I do this movement, my quads seem to look a little bit fuller, a little bit rounder, but you have to be super attentive. I mean, giving a fuck is the minimum threshold. And I see a lot of people, they don't. They want the results, but they don't want the process. It's cliche, but the process is so detailed and there's so much observation that has to go into it if you actually want to get to that goal, that you have to be process focused. And I would say I'm probably 99% process focused at the moment. Like the goals, they're there to sort of push me in the right direction, but the focus is like entirely on the process, almost entirely. And I've noticed that people who are focused on the process, kind of ironically, they get closer to their goals. Whereas the people who say, oh, like, I need a physique I can be proud of. I want to get this physique. This is my goal physique. Teach me how to get this physique. They don't do well. They don't do well unless you really flip their mindset and get them process focused. They're just not going to do well the vast majority of the times. And sometimes I'll ask someone a goal physique just to see where their head is at, just to see how realistic their expectations are. But the ones who are process focused, the ones who are inquisitive and curious and asking questions about why are we doing this, or why this many sets, or why did you recommend this? And it's not questioning me as the coach, it's just being curious about the process. They do better across the board. Like that's the one thing that is very, very correlated to results. It's being process focused more than goal focused.
What I have the feeling, the person that you're describing right now are also the people who love training the most of the time, who are just interested in just going to the gym, training. It's not necessarily so much of building that physique that they had in mind or so. It's just about going in there, feeling great. Like we all know that great sensation that we are getting after a proper training session, and enjoying the entire process that you've just talked about. And those are the ones who are actually then able to do this for more than 5 years or so, more than 10 years. And then you're starting to see the progress, right? Because you've been focused on the process. And I don't know how it is with you, Geoff, how many people in your more so closer friend circle are lifting, because you've been now doing this since 8 years. How many people do you still know from back when you started are still doing it?
Not many. There's a lot of like inconsistency, or only lifting in the spring because after the spring is the summer, that type of situation, or just people who drop off. And I guess that's normal. I think as lifters, we tend to treat lifting differently than other pursuits in life because we put a lot into this. It's our passion. And so sometimes I think that we expect more from other people. And I've always found it interesting thinking about why some people are passionate about certain things and don't care about others. Why are some people that they get bitten by the training bug? They just really enjoy it. Whereas other people, they have to force themselves to do it. They have to have accountability, or they have to motivate themselves to work out. I love working out. Like I have to motivate myself to take days off. True, like it's not exaggeration. I have to, force myself to, because it's good for me, right?
Yeah.
You have to rest, to recuperate, to recover, etc. And so if you want better progress, sometimes you have to rest. You have to hold yourself back. For me, 2 reps in reserve is more difficult than 0, which is an unusual situation. But the coin has sort of been flipped in some ways. But yeah, I've always found it interesting. Why do some people, they're really, really focused and interested on one thing, and other people, they're not. And sometimes it's just the results that you get. You know, if you get results, you'll enjoy it more and you'll keep doing it. You'll get more results, etc. But man, I know some people who they got really good results and then they fell off.
Mm.
And I know other people who didn't get great results, but they kept at it, and eventually they did get great results. So yeah, it's really quite interesting why some people keep going. Why do some people enjoy it? Why do some people feel like they're rewarded by it? Um, maybe it's genetic, maybe it's environmental, but yeah, could be a lot of things.
I even said in the past to Steve as well, I can absolutely understand why some people just fall off the wagon and don't pick lifting up afterwards anymore. Also then due to other obligations that they have in life. You even brought it up about building a family, having kids at home, right? Maybe going down a career path that takes up even more time and effort and all that kind of stuff. So I can absolutely understand that people who start lifting in their maybe early 20s or even later teens or so, do it up until they have other obligations in their life. And then some people, some very few people stick around and do it for, I don't know, someone like Geoff Alberts for like 35 years or so, right? But this is very much... Yeah, exactly. But I found it always interesting to then, especially being now an online coach and having been here in this industry since a long time, to see who's still around, because it's kind of the same circle as kind of a couple of years back. And some people come and go, right? But it's not kind of growing anymore to that same extent because it's kind of always the same group. Or maybe we are just, we're just boomers. We don't even notice that a new generation is actually coming up over on TikTok or so. I don't know.
Yeah, or TikTok. Yeah, it's, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'll just quickly say, I think for me at least, I know with training, like it anchors me, like it is the foundation to like a good day. If I go in, train, get a sweat on, get a pump on, whatever it is, it's just like, I need that like most days until I have one rest day a week basically. And then deloads, as Pascal knows, I always lose my head in a deload. Like I'm always like, maybe I should do this, change this. Like, am I doing this wrong? Because I just too much time and freedom and want to be back in there training really. So, and I think genetics actually probably play quite a bit of a role in this. I definitely see some people are like they need that short-term gratification, whereas like bodybuilding is, natural bodybuilding especially, is like delayed gratification personified, like quite literally. So people aren't good at that. Again, just like, and maybe they're good at it in other areas of their life, because I'm sure there's some areas of my life I'm not good at it. But that's at least my perspective.
Yeah, anchors is, man, that's so well said. Just because it is literally the anchor of my day. Like I work in the morning, then I go to the gym, then I go for my walk, then I get back, and then I work more, and then I go to bed. Like that's the middle of my day. That's the highlight of my day. That everything is literally centered around that. And so, yeah, on days where I don't train, right now I'm on 5 days a week. Most of the time I was on 7 days, just because that was what held my day together, basically. You know, the day was a sandwich and that was the meat, essentially. And so, yeah, anchors is a good way to put it. And that's where I don't do well on like 3 day per week full body. I've done it and I think it's a good way to drop fatigue, but long term, I just don't like having that many days off. And I do think there probably is a genetic component to this. I mean, I remember once I was traveling in Indonesia and I got in a motorcycle accident. This was back when I was a runner, and I sprained my wrist really badly. And I was actually quite lucky to only get that. And so for like a week or two, I couldn't run. And man, I was miserable.
Yeah.
Just because it wasn't even the pain. It wasn't even, the discomfort of having that sprained wrist. It was, I didn't have an outlet. I didn't have a place for all the energy to go. And, looking back, even from when I was 14, 15 years old and I joined the high school cross country team, I was always the kid who pushed himself too hard in training. I was always the kid who was injured, who was pushing too hard, who the coach said easy 3-mile run, and it was not an easy 3-mile run for me, at least. And so no one taught me that. I wasn't like reading up about distance running. It felt good to push hard. I got a profound sense of gratification from doing that from basically the start. And so I don't think that was environmental because other people were in the same environment. I don't think that was cultural because this was before I read a lot about distance running, before I knew anything about it. It was just what came instinctively to train hard. And not everyone has that. A lot of people can learn that. Realistically, some people will never learn that, or it'll be very, very, very difficult. But for me, that was just something that came very naturally. And other things don't come naturally to me at all. So, yeah, I do think that genetics are relevant here. And I do think there's a segment of the natural community who says, like, oh, genetics don't really, they kind of downplay that. And maybe I've been guilty of that in the past. But, yeah, there's certainly a big factor, especially at the highest levels. Like if someone wants to be the best bodybuilder in the world or the fastest sprinter in the world, I mean, genetics are maybe the most relevant thing. Because if you don't have those, it doesn't matter what you do, right? And so, yeah, at the highest level, if you want to run 9.8 second 100 meters or something, or play in the NBA, you can work as hard as you want. You can dream as much as you want to dream. But yeah, I think unless you have that prerequisite, in some cases, especially at the highest levels, it's just not going to happen. Luckily, I think with lifting, it doesn't matter. Because even if you fail to get to the highest levels, you're still doing something amazing for your health, and it can still be very, very gratifying. Even if you're not a world record holder, or even if you're not a pro card holder, like it's still doing something that is going to benefit you and benefit all areas of your life. So I think it's something that sometimes people, even if they aim high and fail, they're still getting a lot out of it.
Yeah, and I think it's totally fine to then say and admit that you are genetically best. That doesn't really mean that you're not working hard at the same time. Because I've seen people who are truly genetically blessed downplay how genetically blessed they are and claim that it's all hard work. And what it is that you're then actually saying is that you are having something special that other people don't when it comes to work ethics and just, I don't know, your mental focus around training, which is pretty far-fetched in my opinion, because there are probably a lot of examples out there who push themselves extremely hard and never going to see the same results as that genetically blessed person. And once again, I think it's totally fine to say, hey, I'm genetically blessed, I know this, but at the same time, I'm putting it to work and I'm doing something about this. And that's totally fine, I think.
I always think as well, the people who are genetically blessed, there's generally someone better than them anyway. So if you claim you have good genetics, it's like you're also suggesting that the people above you also maybe are there because of their better genetics. So you shouldn't feel bad about like being okay about how your genetics are. And I think, like you said, like Geoff, it's only going to benefit you kind of going to the gym, weightlifting. It's a healthy, productive thing to be doing. And also, like most people listening are going to be in and around average. That's how averages work. So if you put in more time than the average person, you're still going to be more muscular than the average person. And like you can be in a really, really good position in that regard and feel very like glad about things. And it's like we said before, so many people give up because they don't maybe see that fast response, but maybe they're a slow burner like you, Geoff, and also like me, or maybe they haven't discovered the things that truly work for them. Like Pascal's just seen like some of his best muscle growth over the last like year, which is crazy to think about. But like, it's just kind of keep going if you enjoy the process. Again, it comes back to the process. And then also it's clear you love learning about the process too and keep up to date with the science, but not getting caught up in that. So yeah, I don't know. I've really enjoyed this discussion. Hopefully the listeners have as well.
One more thing, and that is touching on the things that you've brought up, Steve, as well, and not being too caught up about the things that people are claiming and all that kind of stuff. And after our discussion, there were a couple of things that you even brought up here this time as well. And also in the past, you did a video, I think it was kind of 52 things people are saying or something like this, where we'll kind of like, You've been talking through each and every single point. It has been a while back, like 6 months ago, a video or so, where then you've talked about training 7 days per week, for example. And it's a typical claim that you can't do something like this. And also here in our discussion, you said that on the leg press, sometimes intentionally, you take your heels off the pad because you want to focus a little bit more so on the quads. And to me, it sounds like you have a little bit more of an intuitive approach and figure things out for yourself and not so much what other people are claiming and what the group is saying that you have to do. And that is something that I truly respect. And maybe you want to touch on this one as the last point for our discussion here today.
So I think it's best to start with the basics, and a lot of measurable physiological qualities or ways that people should train are going to be on a bell curve. So some people, in terms of volume, some people do really well on low volume. That is a thing. Some people do really well on high volume. That's a thing as well. But the moderate approach is where most people are going to fall. And I actually think that the evidence-based recommendations are pretty good overall for most muscle groups. And so I started with the basics. I started with moderation, and then I kind of took forays into more extreme approaches or more unusual approaches, or approaches that were not evidence-based. Or maybe I saw someone do something on social media. We kind of frown on the big guy at the gym does it kind of approach, but he's big. There's at least something there. And, maybe you copy him and that wasn't actually what got him big. Maybe it was to the detriment of him getting big. But I also think that there's very little risk in trying new things. Sure, injury is a thing. I've gotten injured. Most people who have lifted almost 10 years very, very seriously have gotten injured. Usually a major injury that takes them out for a few months, right? So, but I think being able to experiment, being able to start at the center and then go out a little bit is something that is worth doing when you stop making progress. If you're still making progress with the reasonable, normal recommendations, just keep going. I'll get DMs from people. They say, oh, my training is this, and this. And I just ask them, are you making progress? And they say, yes. And I just say, well, keep going. Keep doing that. You're making progress. You're seeing results. Don't even ask me what I do, right? Just focus on yourself and focus on what's working. And then when it doesn't, that's when you can sort of go off and try new things that might seem a little bit extreme or a little bit controversial, etc. And so I think starting with that moderate approach is something that is very, very important, because you don't want to start at the extremes and then move to moderation. It just doesn't really make sense, because again, due to that bell curve, you want to give yourself the best chance of what is probably going to work. And that is going to be with stuff that seem to work with the most possible amount of people.
No, absolutely. And you brought up one great point, and that is there is very little downside of experimenting a little bit. You can only win because you're now one step wiser in making a calculated decision in the future of like, either it works or it doesn't. If it doesn't, then you still have more information to go off by. And also so many people are afraid of something that hasn't even happened or occurred. So why shouldn't you then sometimes take a calculated risk where then there's only upside, especially when you're in the early stages of your lifting career, right? There's even less risk overall, unless you're doing something that is absolutely irresponsible or so. But most people that have a fairly decent approach to something, there's very little risk to the downside, and you can only win. And this is why I very much love those things where you are saying like, people are saying that I can't train 7 days out of the week, but I'm feeling good, so why the heck shouldn't I? Or something like Steve right now tried himself with a deload. People are always claiming I have to deload. I now did 2 days of a rest. Why shouldn't I take the rest? And now he actually then reported for the people just that they know, yesterday or 2 days ago, he's told me on a voice message that he's actually quite toast.
trashed. Weirdly enough, I don't know if Geoff has anything to say on this. So what I ended up doing, I typically run 5-to-1 accumulation to deloads. And I typically find I need that deload at that point. I ran 6 because I was like, fuck it, I still feel good. So I ran 6, and then I just took a rest day, my normal rest day. I took 2 days off, and I just fucked it. I got back into things. So typically I'd take 7-day deload, took 2 days off. And now I'm 5 weeks post that, and I'm just the last 2 weeks. Yeah, I'd say 2 weeks now, maybe even a bit longer. I've just had this, like in the gym, I feel okay, I can perform. But outside of the gym, I have this just general level of fatigue. Like every night, my sleep's not great, even though I'm in bed for a good period of time. And I just have this general, like just lethargy just across my day where I'm like, even if I get a good night's sleep, I don't wake up and feel sprightly. So I don't know if that's something you can speak to. And it's just interesting because I'm like, even next week, I don't know if I'd need a deload. Physically, I could maybe perform, but man, psychologically and just mentally, I'm getting to this point where I'm just like, I can't function outside of the gym almost. Like, not that it's that bad, but like, it's just I know there's this wave of like, or not wave, this like a blanket of fatigue that's across me psychologically or like neurologically.
Yeah. You have cancer, actually. No.
To be precise,
if something happens now, Geoff, you're gonna feel bad.
I might regret that, but it's something where I know Faz Lifts talked about this, where I think he took an even more extreme with like 2-to-1, like 2 weeks on, 1 week deload, because he found that he just got injured or picked up an ache and a pain or a niggle or something every third week. And so eventually he was just like, I'm just going to deload every third week. And that worked really well for him. So I think everyone has a number of weeks that they can go hard before they have to take a week off. And for him, that ratio when doing powerlifting training was 2-to-1. Super strong guy, training very hard. 2-to-1 just was what seemed to work for him. For me, it's like probably like 12-to-1 something, or 20-to-1. I can just keep going and going and going. But yeah, eventually, it does catch up, especially when dieting. That's what I found. Like the things that you're describing. Oh man, like I definitely experienced those in May when I was getting, pretty diced. And so I actually had to manage fatigue for like the first time ever. And, in hindsight, I probably should have dropped volume sooner. I probably should have dropped like RDLs and squats earlier, just because when you're shredded, those movements, they're just different and they're just not worth doing. And so, yeah, what you're describing, it kind of sounds like with this disrupted sleep. I probably had it a little bit worse. I was probably getting 3 or 4 hours, maybe 5 hours of sleep a night for the last month. But yeah, it sounds like a low grade version of that. And maybe like excess cortisol. Like I'll notice that if I go too hard, too long, I will get like a little puffy, a little bloated in the face. Like I'll retain water a little bit more, a little bit disrupted sleep. I'll get slightly more irritable. And this is where I've experimented with like twice a day training or with super high volumes. And yeah, I'll notice those little signs and symptoms. I got them as a runner as well, where I was running 80, 90 miles a week, all of it really hard, tempo runs, fartleks, progressions, hill sprints, etc. And yeah, like it just catches up to you eventually. And then you have to pull back. And I think it goes up exponentially. So it's not like you're digging a hole and every week is digging the same amount. It's like if you keep pushing, the further you push into that fatigue, the faster you're digging down and the longer it takes to get out of it. So yeah, right now I'm pretty mindful about managing my fatigue in real time. So if I get like a bad night of sleep, I take that into account immediately, like right away. So when I say I don't deload, it's because I'm steering the ship early. So if I notice that kind of stuff, I don't wait a week. I don't wait. I take a reduced volume session right away. And that's where I might do like a 1 set to failure thing, which compared to my normal training is, actually pretty easy. The high intensity bros are going to be seething at that. What their hit workout is my deload, but for me, compared to what I usually do, that's a reduction in training stress. And then I can just sort of steer the ship with these small course corrections to get the training stress and the progression that I want. And you found that 5-to-1 works really well. But yeah, if you find that you push past that normal 5-to-1 paradigm and you start noticing those signs, I think that's very useful information, because you can either switch to 4-to-1 or reduce the training stress enough to get you to that 5-to-1, or just make sure that you take the full week. And I have gravitated to more of like an instinctive, in the moment kind of structure, but I think having a fixed structure is also quite useful if you stick to it. But the thing is, like, stress is not constant anyway, right? Like, so sometimes people would be like, normally a 6-to-1, but if they're going through some shit, it might be a 3-to-1, might be a 2-to-1. I mean, I've had people who are really going through a tough time, and it was more like, just cut everything to where it's somewhere between a deload and a normal training week, and like, let's just go with that because that's all you can really handle at the moment. And so I think, managing it in real time is something that is quite useful. But having that base structure is also very useful, because that's something that is good to go off of. Instinctive training is useful, but having some kind of structure, I think, is actually essential. Like, instinctive training isn't just going in and then, what should I do today? Like, there has to be something in place, I think, whether it's the overall structure of the block or of the week, or the bigger picture. But I think that at least having some structure is really important.
That's what I'm thinking as well. Because you said that it's useful information to know that 5-to-1 of a paradigm may work then for Steve, but at the same time, there are so many variables that can come into play that may impact how well it is that you're recovering. Sometimes you may not even get rid of all of the accumulated fatigue from the last mesocycle because you simply didn't recover that well as well. And so many things go into that. That's why having somewhat of a structure to go off by, so that you know what to do, but then being flexible enough when then the body tells you to be flexible in terms of like, am I able to push a little bit further, or do I even need to pull back a little bit earlier, is the way to go, in my opinion, as well.
Yeah, I think what I learned was, and I think you're completely right, Geoff, like having a structure is important. So you might have planned a 5-to-1, but if in that 5th week you finish it and you feel great, go for the 6th week. Like, don't just deload for the sake of it. Similarly, if you feel shit in week 3, maybe you need to bring that a little bit forward. What my take home from this was, 2 days wasn't enough for me. And I basically did it because I've got a forced deload from Friday. So I knew I needed, like, I just was like, fuck it, I'll get into this a little bit sooner. But you basically, I would think you want to finish your deload feeling like very fresh, very recovered. If that hasn't happened, like, don't just cut your deload short. Don't try and get back into things sooner than you should, because the whole point of this deload is to remove all the accumulated fatigue from all the weeks before, so then you can set yourself up for many more. So it's confirmed my thoughts anyway, that like, I can't just push myself like and never take time away.
Yeah. It's Max Aida. He put it really well. He said it's giving yourself the gift of missing training. And so that's if I'm not chomping at the bit after a break, then I'm not ready yet. If I'm not like, absolutely, the fire is raging, I'm not ready yet. So after this cut, I took like 2 weeks of 3-day per week full body, which I hate. I mean, I don't like that. I've mentioned it before. I just don't like it, but it's enough recovery compared to what I usually do. And it's 3-day per week full body, but it was not much lower body, because I was just recovering from the diet, from walking, 18,000 steps a day, and just completely trashed. So it was like kind of full body, but not really full body. Like full body, like, upper body plus some hamstring curls or something. And so, but I took 2 weeks, and then I took a 3rd week that I didn't have planned, because I could tell that I needed it. Like, after that 6 months of dieting, I needed it for sure. And so I don't mind detraining, because I do think that there's something with the resensitization. And you start back lower than where you were, but you get that momentum, and I think it's possible to hurdle past where you were before. And so that's sort of where I am right now. The weights I'm using are, even though I've regained, 10 or 15 pounds since the diet, I'm not stronger, but I can tell that I have momentum, and I'm in a good place to make future gains, because I'm fresher and I'm resensitized and I'm motivated and I'm mentally clear and I'm there at the gym. I'm focused. And so I think that's actually very useful. 2 days is like, you might feel fine. That's the thing. Like, you might feel fine then, but then in a week you're like, oh, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think letting yourself dissipate all the fatigue and then be chopping at the bit is probably the best way to go.
Absolutely. Cool. Let's wrap it up then. I think I speak for Steve as well when I say it was truly an honor to have you on, Geoff. We could have probably went on for much, much longer. So that's why, and I think that the audience will love that. And if you are cool with that, we will bring you on another time in the future. A near distant future, not so long, in kind of 1 or 2 years, as Steve usually does it with his guests, because it was very much an honor, and there are still plenty of things that I actually wanted to discuss with you. For example, the last cutting phase, why you're not interested in bodybuilding and all that kind of stuff, so stepping on stage and all that kind of stuff, because I think that these are valuable things to talk about for the audience, and it's definitely something that we will get to the next time that we have you on.
Yeah, that would be great. I've been a long-term viewer for I don't even know how long, probably 4 or 5 years. Certainly I remember watching episodes around the time I was getting into lifting.
Oh, wow.
And I've like you and SS Diable and all these other podcasts and Mike Matthews. That was what that was a lot of my education as a lifter in my first few years.
Isn't it then pathetic, Geoff, to come onto a show that you've been following for such a long time, who you've now exceeded by a long shot in terms of then the subscribers on YouTube?
It's just luck. I don't know. But yeah, no. So thank you guys for all that you do. It's surreal hearing an introduction to a podcast that you listen to, and then now you're on the podcast, as always, with Steve Hall. So yeah, thank you.
And
guys.
not for the last time then.
No.
Yeah, I'd love to come back if you have.
I appreciate it a lot. I concur what Pascal said for sure, and it's awesome to know that you've been listening for so long. Kind of surreal as well to kind of know that. I was going to say it before. I remember seeing some of your earlier kind of videos, and I think I first came across you because you were kind of critiquing some of Mike's work, which I thought was great. Like, to have different perspectives and like to be able to have that take on it, and it kind of speaks to everything we've been talking about today in terms of like just questioning things and not just like taking things and taking your own experience into account. I want to make sure, because mainly most people listening probably know where you're at and are subscribed or following you on Instagram. But if they aren't, where should they check you out, Geoff?
So just my name, Jeffrey Verdiscoval, and I couldn't think of anything creative for my YouTube channel, so I just, typed in my name, and then so that's what it is, and so people can search that, and then on Instagram also my name, because I lack creativity.
Awesome. We'll make sure that's all linked in the bio or description, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. Oh, and make sure to comment on this if people are still listening, because I've left this right to the end, but I hope people comment on this and make sure, like, give us your feedback. If you want to see Geoff back on the show, let us know. If you have any questions you really want to be asking him, maybe we can ask those next time. And yeah, we'll catch you on the next one.
I would be very disappointed if people aren't commenting, because there were a lot of requests to get you on. So if there's no comment here, what the fuck is wrong with you guys? So cheers.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality, and we know how to do it, and we will help you achieve this. The Minicup movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the mini-cut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The mini-cut movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.